Pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Welcome everybody to this Waterville Planning Board meeting. The first item on our agenda is to approve the minutes from the July 25th and August 22nd meetings. So I'll entertain a motion to approve.
Make the motion to approve.
Second. Okay. And, we have Cassie online. So,
Is it complicated by the fact that I was not at the August one? Should we do them separately?
oh, yeah, we can vote separately. We'll say the same
Make a motion.
motion and second. Yeah.
Make a motion to approve the July minutes.
Okay. So, Tom,
Yes.
I'm a yes.
I'm a yes.
Matt? Yes. Hillary?
Yes.
Bruce?
Yes.
And Cassie?
I'll abstain since I wasn't there.
Okay. Now I'll make a motion to approve the August 22nd meeting.
Second.
Okay, Tom,
Sorry.
Sam, and Matt.
Tom's a yes.
Yes. April?
I will abstain. I wasn't there.
Matt?
Yes.
Hillary?
Yes.
Bruce?
Yes.
And Cassie?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, disclosure of conflict of interest. Does anybody on the board have a conflict that they wish to on any of the votes that they're taking tonight? Hearing none, we'll move on. Arnold Block LLC is requesting informal pre-application review for the creation of apartments at 103 and 109 Main Street.
Good evening. I'm Jeff Allen from AE Hudson Engineers, and Tracy Nail, who's one of the owners of the property, is online as well. So I guess what I can do is give you a quick introduction to the project. If I can share my screen. This is, as you said, 103 to 109 Main Street. It's not sharing. There we go. This is the front view, thanks to our friends at Google. And the building is actually, it looks like three buildings on the front. It's the Loyal Biscuit on the left, and then a vacant building right now in the center. And over on the other side here is Jorgensen's, the old cafe, which is also for lease. So what we're looking at now is just making some apartments, creating 6 apartments up on the second floor here. Part of that, I've got another view here in the back of the. Yeah, this is in the back. We have parking, and the parking lot actually goes around the Lebanese restaurant here. But there's, I think, 27 spaces in the back parking area, so there's more than enough for the 6 new apartments that are being created. Then this is the site plan that shows. This is Loyal Biscuit here, and then a vacant piece, and the old Jorgensen's is in this building. And so these are the parking lots, parking spaces out back, and actually the Lebanese restaurant is part of this property as well, and they rent space from the Arnold block. So, yeah, 6 apartments. They're going to be a mix of 1 and 2 bedroom apartments for right now, and I think they have some other plans later on. But right now, it's just the 6 apartments that they're doing.
Great. Any questions for Jeff? Hillary?
So 1 and 2 bedroom apartments. I'm looking at the parking lot. How many parking spaces would go with it, or would you give any with it?
There are a total of 27, and I'm not sure. I don't believe they're shared with anybody else at this point. Probably some are allocated for the Lebanese restaurant here, but I don't know. That might be a question for Ms. Nail.
Yeah, they would need to have 6, right, if there are 6 apartments?
Yeah, as of right now, we have, I believe, 3 parking spaces allocated for Loyal Biscuit, and 2 for the Lebanese Bakery. So we have 22 remaining available parking spaces for the proposed residential units.
Perfect, thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Tracy, is the plan to only look at the second floor right now?
For right now, yes, we're going to leave it open so that we can, the hope is to eventually extend to be able to develop onto the third floor. But for right now, this first phase would just be developing the second floor.
Question?
Yeah, Bruce.
What, do you know, is this mic on? Okay. Do you know when the last time apartments were utilized in that space? How many?
So my understanding, and I haven't researched exact dates, but it used to be the Arnold building where they had some sort of retail construction material or lumber type store there, and that closed. I think it was in the late 60s, so it's been vacant for over 50 years.
Okay. And maybe this is for Ann or Jeff or whoever, but no rezoning is necessary, so what do they need from us, Ann?
Just site plan review, so they'll come back to the next meeting with letters from the reviewers, the water district, the sewer district, the city engineer, and the deputy fire chief.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions?
Sorry, this is another question for Tracy. Just the parking lot back there occasionally gets full. Is that because of Jinwan? And then is there going to be some sort of, I don't know, how do you control who gets in and out of there?
Yeah, we'll have to certainly address that. There are a lot of people that park there without a permit to do so. So we'll certainly, when we begin construction, we'll have some plan in place as far as how to keep non-permitted parkers from utilizing the space.
Right. Which I just want to make clear, because this is being right. Like, I love Jinwan. I am presuming that's where the parking folks are coming from when the lot is full. Anyway, yes, thank you.
Certainly.
One more comment?
Yeah, go ahead, Bruce.
Just, well, I just want to say thank you for being willing to take this on, because I think there's a lot of interest in the downtown area, and I think there are people who are really interested at some point, maybe, living above some of the businesses, and it'll give some good vibes to the area. So thank you for being willing to at least consider this.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Any other questions? Any questions from members of the public? Okay. I don't see anybody online raising their hands. Okay. Well, thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Item number 4, KV Cap Real Estate is requesting informal pre-application review for a creation of apartments at 52 King Street. This is you again, right, Jeff?
This is me again. It's the all Jeff night. So first I have if I can get back to my Zoom, I can share my screen again, I think. Well, there we go. This is, I think there's a good article in this about this in the newspaper recently. This is a series of lots down on, the primary lot is fronted here on King Street, 52 King Street. There's an existing 6-unit apartment there. And the other lots in the cluster here are 24 Gold Street, which has a duplex on it now, 53 Gold, 26 Gold, which is numbered lot 153 here, is vacant, as is lot 155, which is 52 Summer Street. 52 Summer Street is a really steep hill. There's a house on the lot right next to it here. And if you're driving along Summer Street, you can just see the tops of the trees right here. This is a very steep grade going down to the back. So what we're proposing here is this is the same view, just with an aerial photo in the background. This is that steep area along the back, and you can see the existing duplex here. And there's the 6 unit that's active here. There's also another empty building in back here. And I've heard anecdotal stories about this area in the sort of the center part of 52 King Street property. At one time was a hockey rink. They'd ice that over in the winter, and everybody would go in there and play. So I've heard a lot of great stories about that being a neighborhood resource there. What we're proposing is, as you mentioned earlier, is a 37-unit apartment building. It'll be 3 stories tall. So that will put the second and third stories just about even with Summer Street up here, just due to the drop-off. Associated with that, we have about, in this concept anyway, we have 82 parking spaces. The units will be a mixture of 1 and 2 bedroom units and some 3s as well, and a few 3-bedroom units for larger families. So we've got 1 space for each of the 1-bedroom apartments and 2 spaces for each of the 2 and 3-bedroom apartments. And then we have some additional spaces that we're using because KV Cap is right across the street here, across King Street, and they have a real parking crunch there. So they'd be able to spill some of their employees and workers across the street onto this property. But that's about it. We've talked about different things we could do, amenities we could add, playgrounds, something like that that we could kind of put in there. We've got some area down here that was thinking about using for a playground that would be well off the street and safe for kids to play there. It's still sort of in the conceptual stages right now, but I think they wanted to present to the board early on in the process because this is something that's going to require some funding, and they're going out and seeking funding sources for it. And by doing this now, getting early approval, early encouragement from the community, from the community, you guys, that makes it a little bit easier to apply for some of these loans and grants. So here tonight also is David Pelton, who's with KV Cap, would be able to answer any other questions that you have.
Great. All right, any questions from the board?
Just had a quick question for Dave.
Yeah.
What are you thinking timeline on the project from, I know you need to raise funding and everything, but from the time you raise funding to the completion, what are you thinking?
Yeah, so the timeline is sort of dictated by the funding part of it. If we can get planning board approval this fall, then we can apply for some grants and some funding, partly through Maine Housing's program and partly through some other programs. That would come in usually in December and January, the answer to those funding requests, and then probably a few months after that before we'd be able to break ground. So next summer is when we might, the soonest we'd be able to break ground. And then KV Cap has just completed a couple of projects similar to this, one in Skowhegan and one in Heartland. And it's about a 12 to 14 month construction period. So you're talking things that get approved today, it's almost, 18 months plus until there's any kind of ability to move in.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Bruce.
Couple of questions. So will these be considered affordable units? which means what? I have a good idea, but it's always good for clarification. Then I've got a follow-up question.
Affordable is a relative term sometimes, right?
Well, it changes, obviously, right.
So yeah, that was really the goal. Obviously, with KV-CAP having our offices right there in the neighborhood, we're very invested in the South End, and we've got Lori and Tony Noonan who are involved with this as owners of some of those pieces of property. They're very interested in what happens in the South End. Paula Raymond is here today, also lives in the South End, very interested in what, doing some good things for that area, especially bringing in new, sort of nicely built but affordable housing stock is key to that. This is modeled after something we're currently doing in Heartland. Heartland is 55 and older, which this wouldn't be, but the rents for 1 and 2 and 3 bedrooms would be the same. We're talking somewhere in the neighborhood of a 2-bedroom apartment being probably around $900 a month, maybe $1,000 a month. It's hard to look into the future 18 months and figure out what rents will be, but it's significantly less than what a market rate rent would be.
Would it be a 60% AMI kind
Yeah,
of thing?
so, and I should mention that these rents are not set by the developer, they're set by Maine Housing. And so basically they tell us what the 50 to 60% median income is in Waterville and the surrounding areas, and then what the rents can be for that demographic.
Right, and that's part of the funding that you receive, obviously.
Right, it's the same program that lots of other developers in the state are involved with the low-income housing tax credits.
Certainly a big need for that income level.
Yeah.
So my other question would be, how many tenants are in those units now, would you say?
So we know that, so there are 8 units, and the 2 unit is 1, right? And then the other unit has 5, 6. So 7 total, is that right? Okay. The Noonans are helping us on the management side with the existing tenants. So they're very helpful in the neighborhood. So with one of the things we've talked about is making sure that they have a place to go. Certainly none of us want to displace a renter or a resident in order to, just to build something new and fresh there. So we would make sure they have a place to go. We've even talked about, is it possible to keep, be building the new building and keeping those in existence, but we kind of realized based on the design that we can't do that. We would have to move them out before we started construction on the new.
Thank you, because that was my next question anyway,
Yeah.
would be the notice that you would give, and obviously that makes it difficult. So thank you for trying to work with whoever is there. And,
Oh, yeah.
But adding 37 units is a big deal for us, so I hope it all goes well for you.
Yeah, Tom.
It appears that the proposed development is going to cover multiple plots of multiple parcels. Do you guys have options to purchase all the required parcels?
We do. Actually, 3 of them are already owned by the Noonans.
Right.
And then the 4th one, you can't see it now, but there's a weird triangle in there that KV-CAP has an option to purchase, yes.
If KV-CAP purchases the properties, will they remain on the city's tax rolls, or is that a non-for-profit? How does that work?
So they would go on to the tax rolls.
Okay.
So there's an expectation that, there'd be improvements to the land and the taxes would probably go up at that point. But the way the primary funding source and the primary tool that this kind of housing uses is a tax credit program. They call it the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, or LIHTC for short. And that requires the project to be a for-profit entity. Otherwise, you can't take tax credits on something that isn't a for-profit entity. So it's a fairly complicated structure, but we've done it. Like I said, we've done it in several other communities already, including right next door in Fairfield, the old Gerald Hotel is set up that way. So it remains a tax-paying entity.
I saw in one of the reports that they estimate around 35 trip ends per day for the residents. Do you see any congestion issues onto those existing roads, because they're pretty narrow to begin with?
Right, we're trying to minimize the amount of traffic we're putting onto King Street because it is very small. And I think that 35 may have been premature. That might be 35 per hour, peak hour. And so that assumes, 8 o'clock in the morning or 7 o'clock in the morning, everybody goes to work, and at 4:30, 5 o'clock, they all come back. So that's something we've got to look at a little bit more closely as we look at the mix of apartments and potential uses.
Does that 35 take into account the parking, the overflow parking from the site across the street? Or
It
is
does not, no.
Okay.
Because that parking is already there. So that's,
Okay.
that's,
Wouldn't
we're
increase
just
it.
moving it from one side of the street to the other, essentially, so.
Are there significant water and sewer hookups that need to be done for this?
All the water, sewer, gas, and everything is available right in King Street. One thing we have looked at is they repaved King Street in the fall of '22. And so right now, there's a moratorium on digging that up. So, we're looking at construction actually starting in '24. I think Mr. Lombardi said it was a 3-year moratorium. We obviously don't want to tear up a brand-new street, but, there's a net increase of 29 new apartments there. That maybe we can get some grace from the city.
And are you proposing to light the proposed parking spaces? And is that going to have any light throw issues with the backyards of any of those abutters?
What we generally use are downcast lighting, so it would try to keep it within the property line. I'm not sure about Waterville standards. I've got to check it out, but typically if they limit it to 1 foot candle at the property line. And so Mrs. Beveridge may be able to confirm that.
It just requires you to keep it on site.
Yeah. So, that's something we've got to look at. Again, this is stuff we look at as we move into final design. But yes, we'd have to have security lighting out there just for safety, residents going out to their cars at night.
Okay. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
And Dave, I've been to the project in Skowhegan, and it's wonderful, and fully confident in your work. A couple concerns that I have, the parking lot. So with the new state law, you won't be required as many parking spaces per unit anyways.
Well, these won't be accessory dwelling units.
State law says that in the new, if it's an affordable housing project, it lowers the parking minimum to 2/3 per unit. So, so you wouldn't need as many anyways. And then, like you said, people would be leaving for work, and that would be when the KV Cap people would be coming in, right? It just concerns me to kind of put a asphalt paradise in the middle of a neighborhood like this, I know that it's very urban and it's very high density down there, but is there a way to be a little bit more mindful than, paving in people's backyards? And I'm a little concerned about that, just the size of the parking lot in relation to how many units. And then my other feedback, and I know this isn't a final plan or anything, has there been any talk about maybe splitting this up into some smaller buildings that might relate better to the surrounding neighborhood? It's a very historic neighborhood, and I think it's important to try and emulate that whenever possible, rather than just putting a very large structure.
Yeah. So we did, we've thought about, we've had some discussions around both those things. If one of our funding sources, if it comes through, will require this to be a LEED certified building. And so along with that would come some concessions, not only with the lighting in the parking lot, but also probably some pervious concrete instead of just straight asphalt, things like that to help with some of the environmental impact pieces of it. as far as splitting up the building, we did think about that. It's just cost prohibitive. It's really challenging to build any kind of affordable housing project that's multiple smaller buildings. It's just the cost per unit goes up exponentially, and it just doesn't. It's almost, that's why you don't see it very often.
Yeah, I mean,
It's pretty
there's
difficult.
one happening in Madison though, right? That matches the neighborhood very well, and that's an affordable unit as well.
Yeah.
So I'd like to just see I mean, we haven't seen what the design would look like or anything, but I am really concerned about if that's the best use of that space and the best way to house people as just putting a big, huge block building in a historic neighborhood like that.
Yeah, I am familiar with the one in Madison, and actually we looked at that space too, pre-COVID. That it's utilizing a different funding source, and it's limited to 18 units. That particular funding source is earmarked for smaller size projects, and so if we wanted to limit the size of this to 18 units, we might be able to do the same thing. But if we wanted to maximize the number of units, then we kind of flip to a different program with the state. These programs aren't perfect, and we often find areas of them that we wish we could bend a little bit more, but it's challenging for sure.
And then the other concern or question, I guess, more so is, is there going to be? I think I've recently been part of like a housing project with some statewide leaders and just some discussions of things going around the state, and I really am passionate about seeing some developments happen that integrate all ages, and I think there's something really powerful about like generational housing, and it impacts on everyone. Is there going to be a way to kind of maximize that type of clientele?
So I actually completely agree with that philosophy. And the project, for example, we did in Heartland was an old elementary school that had a community center next to it. What we built was 55 and older housing, but the community center primarily was working with youth programs. Mm-hmm. So we thought that was a great matchup, having the youth and the 55 and older community basically right next to each other. The neighborhood that this is in, we're wide open to ideas on how to do that. Mm-hmm. Obviously, with what KV Cap does, we're with every age, from infants all the way through, so we want to see programs that can do that.
Do you have an idea of how many, like three bedrooms there would be?
I think the design right now has 4 3-bedrooms in there, and then more of them are 1 and 2 bedrooms. Mm-hmm. And it is open to all ages. I mean, it's considered, say, workforce housing, but there's no limit. So, and then doing things. We do have some extra land. We've talked about would a community garden work well there? Would a playground work well there? Both a community garden and a playground. We're open to that discussion, and we're having active discussions with the neighborhood too.
Yeah, I wonder if the neighborhood association might have some feedback on some ways to incorporate, the entire surrounding community into the project. Presumably some of the people living there wouldn't be from the community, right? We're bringing people in. So we want to make sure that everybody gets integrated into that community really well, and there is that sense of community, because I feel like the neighborhood association's done a really great job building that.
No doubt.
And it's a great asset, I think, to the project too, if you could get some input on. I mean, they did a great job when they did the park, like getting neighborhood input on what would you like to see here, like perhaps some sort of community meeting where you could say, what types of, facade do you like the best? And maybe you don't go with that, but it might be a way to get some great neighborhood feedback as well. There's a lot of very passionate people.
We did. You're exactly right, and I completely agree. I think that we talked about this building pushing it back as far as we can against that hill so that it's as least intrusive to the road as possible. And, you know, there are in front of it, if you walk the neighborhood, there are already some 3-story units that are around it. So we don't think it'll be as intrusive as it might look from the bird's eye view. And certainly not from Summer Street on the other side, where you'll pretty much be seeing the tops of trees and then the 3rd story and the roof of this building.
Perhaps there's ways to, with like the architecture design, if you have to keep it in one building, to have some like pitched roofs along the way, or you know, just to like at least emulate the feel of the neighborhood if you can't do it that way. But I would love and encourage you to do some sort of community meeting where, you know, people put a green sticker on the things they like the best. You know, all the strategies, right? So, and then, you know, what would you like to see? Community garden, a playground, a basketball court, like what sorts of things, and that might be a really successful way to get the whole community involved as well.
Yeah, I agree. That'd be great.
Are there any other questions? Hillary?
Yeah, the funding that you might be able to acquire, can it be extended to something like a playground, or is that going to be?
We would probably just do extra fundraising on top of that.
Yeah.
It's, you know, it gets a little frustrating sometimes when the funding is very siloed.
Right.
You know, housing has to be for the housing part only.
No, I mean, it makes sense.
But we've already talked, KVCAP's already talked about that, you know, how much would it be to put in a playground somewhere between probably $15,000 and $25,000 to do a good playground, and we think that that's doable.
So I think it's a great project. I'm really grateful that you're looking into it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, Bruce.
Thank you, too. Now, I took a ride by there today, and in fact, my mom lives down in that area. I grew up in that area, and well, I agree with Samantha on, you know, whatever we can do, community input. I will say, anything that goes down there will be an improvement. The houses in some of that area are in very rough shape. The ones on Gold Street. So anything that goes, and the sooner we get them, are a plus. So thank you for pursuing this, and I hope the funding comes through.
Thanks.
Is there any questions from members of the public? Yeah. Yeah. Do you mind just coming up to the thing so the people online can hear you? Sorry.
So, when we first started getting involved in this project, we contacted Ann and said, you know, what can we do down there and so on, and she gave us these kind of funny looks, and we left there saying, what the heck's going on? And then she said, well, maybe you ought to talk to Dave Pelton, and we're like, oh, okay, and I don't know why, but we will. And they were interested in doing the same thing. We were going to buy it and build some units back there ourselves. And my mother bought, if the map was still up, I'd show you, but my mother lived in the same house for over 70 years, which borders the properties that we now own. So obviously, I grew up down there, and my wife and I just wanted to find a way to pay back the community. So that's why we got involved in this project. We were going to build something there, affordable housing for the community, blah, blah, blah. The guy that owned the property was Arthur Gagne, and he did so much for the community kids down there, the skating rink. There's more history down there than people know. There used to be professional boxing matches down there, and skating, and every kid, Paula and her brothers and sisters and my brother, everybody that went down there, there was a youth center down there. And if we weren't in the youth center all winter long, we were out there skating and stuff. So this was just our way of giving back to the community. And I know I've talked to a lot of the people down there. A lot of the people are still there that were there when my mom was there. And they're excited that this is going on and stuff. So that makes my wife and I excited and happy to work with Dave on this project. And I think it'll be great for the community. I mean, obviously my heart is down there. I grew up down there, and I want to see this down there, you know, so it would be a great thing for the community.
it would be neat, Paula, to somehow capture some of those, like the history of, you know, so and so had a boxing match here, or a picture of the old skating ring on like plaques or something, so that that history, you know,
So Paula did
stays-
mention that just before
stays
this
there.
meeting.
Yeah.
There are some, and she said, why don't we move those plaques down to this area? You know,
Yeah,
and
almost like
stuff,
a living history museum kind of thing.
Right, yeah.
A
yeah.
walking
a lot,
history
A
museum.
lot went on down there. A lot of kids could have been took in the wrong turn in their lives, but didn't because of that facility down there. So there is a lot of history down there, and that's why Laurie and I would like to pay back the community with this. So, yeah. Thank you.
That's great. Yeah, I'd love to see that. Just preserve some of that history. Like, I didn't know that about boxing, or this is the first I've heard of the skating rink, right? And that's really neat.
There was a team from Waterville that used to practice down there. It's James' team, the Waterville Bruins. That's where they had all their practices back in the 50s and 60s.
That's really neat.
Right, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's neat. If you need help on that, Paula, let me know.
So you're going to open a training center there?
I would love to help with
A
that.
training center there? A
Yeah.
boxing? Yeah.
And I don't want to sound like I'm being like a naysayer. I'm absolutely not, Dave. I am very excited for this project. I'm just saying, let's make sure that we are being mindful of the development when possible. I'm not trying to put a hardship on anybody, but you know, if it is possible to pitch the roof and make it look kind of like it matches the other buildings, I think that is a valuable thing that we can do.
I appreciate, Samantha, you asking Dave to extend to a community to see what our input is. We don't necessarily have to be abutters.
Mhm.
Because there's a lot of people that are starting to hear about it, and so they're kind of like, what's going to happen? You know, and now they're hearing these 37 apartments, they're doubling that. And so they're going to 74 people. What are we going to do? And then if there's children, we're talking 100 and some odd. So there's a lot of bits and pieces that will, you know, that a community would want to sit and chat about and, you know, hear what's going on and how we're going to sustain that in a healthy way. Because that's part of S Center, is having a healthy and welcoming community. And so we want to make sure that that is going to continue
Yeah.
in some way.
The other thing I didn't mention is my wife and I own and manage over 100 units. And our concern is that when these people, if we have to take them out of there when the time comes, that we will certainly try to put them in some of the units that we have. We will give them first option to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I used to work at the teen center, so I am very aware of, you know, all of the kids that are playing in that neighborhood, and it is busy, and it's a very tight, like, community, and you know, even if the housing stock isn't the cream of the crop, and this would be much nicer, it's still going to hurt people, I think, when they see a building get torn down in their neighborhood, no matter what, right? So, yeah, so, you know, it might have sentimental value to somebody. And so I think being able to have people as part of that will lessen the blow a little bit. And who knows, somebody might have a great idea for something other than a playground. You know, we just like automatically default to playgrounds. And one of the kids might be like, we have 20 playgrounds, and you know what we really need is, you know, a boxing ring.
Pickleball.
But you never know. So I think there's a lot of power in some of that. But I'm really interested in preserving some of the history in that area and finding a way to display that so that when kids are playing at the playground, they stop and say, oh, did you know? You know? So touch base with me, Paula, if you need help with that project. Any other questions? Anybody online? Okay. Well, thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Oh, when are you going to come back?
We're still waiting to get some survey and some other site information before we can do the final design. We've got to have wetlands looked at because we want to try to avoid those if possible. And so we've got the wetland scientist and the surveyor. This is on their schedule, but it will be a little while before they get to it and get us the data. So it may be a couple months.
Is there any concern about the runoff of that hill?
It's
It drains okay?
from,
or-
I was out on site and it does come down and it follows the little drainage way out of there.
Yeah.
So my only concern is if there's wetlands in there. We want to minimize our impact on that because oftentimes there would be wetlands at the toe of a slope.
Yeah,
So we got to work around that.
absolutely.
Certainly, I would think before the end of November, we'd want to come back.
Yeah.
Before the end of November.
We're pushing,
Yeah. So,
Great,
thank you.
thank you. Okay, item number 5 is revision to the zoning ordinance for LD 2003. I think we had like a pretty robust discussion about this last meeting, but if anybody has anything that they want to add, or anybody that wasn't at the meeting.
I have a few comments.
Yeah.
I found a report from the city of Bath, Maine. It's planning for accessory dwelling units and guidebook, and they have a sample of their city of Bath ADU ordinance. They have some layouts of proposed units, like a 1-bedroom at 300 square feet and a 2-bedroom at around 800 square feet. And they just have a number of checklist of things that their ordinance would include, and I just think it'd be worth it for the board to look at, even people online. And the website is www.agefriendlylowerkennebec.org. So I think it's a valuable resource. I know we looked at the South Portland ordinance last time, and Bruce's suggestion was try to find some other cities to look at. So Bath, Maine has one.
Can you say that again? Age friendly?
Agefriendlylowerkennebec.org.
Maybe you could send the link to
Yeah,
the planning board, Tom, if
Sure.
you don't mind.
absolutely.
For the people in the audience that don't know, we're working on an ordinance that allows for accessory dwellings on properties. So we've been working on it for a little while. We've been talking about things like, should they be allowed to be short-term rentals? Should one of the units be owner-occupied? Buffering, all of that good stuff. And an accessory dwelling is basically just a smaller, it doesn't have to be attached, but it can be attached on the parcel. So state law has now asked us to revise our ordinance and allow up to 2 units on every housing unless otherwise specified in like their deed or something like that. Like we do have a neighborhood that has specific, like up on Upper Main Street that has specific deed requirements. So they might not have to apply to that. But everywhere else would have to allow for up to at least 2 units and without a parking restriction applied. So, if you added another unit, you wouldn't have to necessarily have the extra parking space off.
And you could use those for short-term rentals?
Well, that's one of the things that we discussed. So the majority of the board felt that we shouldn't be allowed to use those for short-term rentals, that it should be a minimum of a 30-day stay. So like,
Short-term rentals thing in Waterville now?
yes. We have a short-term rental ordinance in Waterville, yeah.
They're allowed in all residential zones except for the residential A zone. And they're supposed to be registered, but apparently not a lot of them are.
What is the A zone?
Residential A is
Your
like,
neighborhood is RA. Your Cherry Hill Terrace or Cherry Hill?
yeah, Cherry Hill
That's
Drive,
residential A.
Upper Main Street, like Ashley Terrace and, all of those little neighborhoods off of, those cul-de-sacs off of Upper Main Street, those are all residential
I have the zoning map
A.
right here if you want to take a look at it.
Highland Ave,
Highland Ave.
Mayflower Hill, Averill, all of that area. The top part of First Rangeway, but not the bottom.
What's that?
people
Will
go to
you
the
go
mic?
to the, would you mind stepping up to the mic if you're gonna ask?
Because
I can summarize your question, that's fine.
there are people
How's that?
online, plus Cassie's online, and people that want to listen afterwards cannot hear you, so.
I can summarize your question. What was your,
Basically, why isn't a residential A neighborhood not allowed something that how do you come up with that class?
so she asked why a residential A neighborhood isn't allowed short-term rentals, and the answer is when we were looking at the short-term rental ordinance, businesses are prohibited in residential A neighborhoods. And so we're treating it kind of as a business, and that was why we had decided that.
So question, can we point out maybe the things that we have tentative agreement on? Do we have, like the size, where did we end up on the
I
square
think-
foot?
Ann, didn't you send out the ordinance, or was it just to me?
No, I sent it out
Okay.
to everybody, the draft, but I set it back to 500 square feet as the maximum, just because that was where we started and we didn't have an official vote. At the last meeting, it seemed like the majority of board members were interested in going up to 700 square feet.
Right, I remember
So the
that.
state allows the city to determine the maximum size for an accessory dwelling unit. That's what we're talking about. We've gone off the subject of Airbnb.
The definition of accessory dwelling, is that another building, or could that be added on into the same building?
That's.
It could be either way.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's set, that definition is set by the state law. And I can send you the draft ordinance that we have at this point. I think I have your email address.
Yeah, so it could be an additional structure, like you could put a tiny home or something of the like. You could convert a garage or the upper floor of your garage. It could be a basement apartment, in-law apartment, or something attached. The idea of the accessory dwelling is really to get like an in-law apartment. So say like my mom could age in place like next to me, and you could have some generational. Yeah. Paula.
Well, I mean, it's not just for me, Paul.
You're right. No, no, I'm just
I think it's just protocol.
Oh, absolutely.
Can you repeat her question, please?
There you go.
I haven't asked one yet. All right.
They just asked Cassie if an accessory dwelling was only a new structure, or if it could be something that was attached to your existing home.
Okay, thanks.
I walk the neighborhood all the time, and we have quite a few small pieces of property where homes were at one time. And a lot of them, I'm going to use the word implode, but I'm not sure that's correct. But if they had a fire, all of the debris from the fire was put into the ground and then it was covered. And I was wondering if it's possible to do these tiny houses on these pieces of property today, perhaps not with a foundation, but that you would go into the ground, but maybe a cement slab. And that might be an incentive for someone to buy these properties that are there right now that are empty and could use maybe for an elderly couple or a single person to build a small, tiny house type of thing.
Yeah, that would be different than the accessory dwelling.
It wouldn't be considered an accessory dwelling?
Yeah, so the accessory
Okay.
dwelling is like if you want to put one
Yeah.
on your property.
Right,
But
right.
by all means, somebody could build something new there or utilize like a tiny home type situation, I think, if they wanted, right?
But she's talking about lots that are smaller than are allowed
Oh.
under our zoning.
Non-conforming.
Yeah, less
Yeah.
than 5,000 square feet
I see.
for the most part, or they're too short, so the house would be too close to the abutter. So what
Yeah.
we would have to do is create some kind of new zone that allowed even smaller lots. than we
Yeah,
have.
interesting point though, Paula, and I mean, maybe bring that back to the housing committee as well. Like that's an underutilized resource that we have in our city that we could do some infill. And yeah, if the city council would want to refer that back to us, that might be a great use of smaller sized efficiency homes.
Right, for a small investor, somebody who would
Yep.
wanna do something like that. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I didn't even know that was a problem, so that's good to know. Cassie?
I just want to go back to the 700 square feet number. Are we talking about that today or no?
Yeah, we can.
Like, should we be, okay. I mean, I don't care. I can talk about it at a different time, but I just want to like reiterate that 700 square feet is pretty large.
Yeah.
And is it possible to have two different like sizes? Like if a lot is under a certain amount of square feet, like we would max out at a 450 square foot accessory dwelling unit. Just because there are no other, like we aren't allowed to have any other regulations, like as far as setbacks go, right? In regard to the accessory unit?
No, we can implement setbacks, right, Ann?
Right, the setbacks, but not minimum number of square feet of land.
Yeah. Yeah, we can
Not
implement
minimum.
So we can implement setbacks, but we can't say like right now it's like one house per 5,000 square feet or whatever, right, Ann?
Well, in the residential B zone,
Yeah.
it's a 10,000 square foot lot, but you can have, if you have 10,000 square feet, you can have 2 units on that lot. But with this ADU regulation, you don't have to have that land for the second unit. So it's dealing with lots that are not conforming to our current standards.
Yeah, so say you had a lot, Cassie, that was 9,950 square feet, right? And you only have one home on it. You wouldn't have to have 10,000 square feet in order to put a second dwelling on it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but we could, yeah, totally. So we can implement setbacks, right?
Yeah,
we're
so
not
we can still
dealing with
implement
situations where
setbacks. Yep, we could still implement setbacks where we say like, you know, in the residential B, if it's 10 feet, you know, from each side, that can still exist.
Okay.
We just can't make it more of a burden than already exists, right? And so like we can't, if in residential B it says it has to be your setback's 10 feet, right? We can't say the ADU has to be set back 20 feet.
Okay. All right, great. As long as we still have some sort of like I'm just like picturing the Wild West, like everybody's just cramming in like a 750 square foot building on their 10,000 square foot lot that already has a giant house on it. So, all right, cool.
But kind of to your size point, one of the things I saw in other ADU ordinances that I read was like based off of a percentage of the existing structure. So like you could make it can't be any more than 80% of the primary dwelling unit, right? So like if your home is 1,200 square feet, then your accessory dwelling couldn't be more than a specific percent, 80% or whatever we would decide.
Right. Okay, great. I love all of that. Okay.
We could do something like that instead of a minimum requirement as well. That's another option.
Awesome. All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, Hillary.
Yeah, I was going to say South Portland has it per square foot and a percentage of the primary dwelling units. So I think the combination of the two together like that, I think makes a lot of sense. The other thing that South Portland does that I think might be wise is the primary entrance for the ADU has to be within 10 feet or has to be, how is it worded? The primary entrance for the ADU shall not be located within 10 feet of a property boundary unless the entrance is in an existing access on a structure existing as of September 1st, 2022. So that would be already, like you can have an ADU as part of a primary structure already, right? It can be part of a house that's already in existence. But if you're building an ADU, it has to be like that entrance would have to be set back at least 10 feet from a boundary. I like that.
Yeah, I do too. Yeah.
So I've seen this in some other communities too. The percentage of the square foot of the existing building seems pretty common in some other states I've worked in. The other thing that they've added in some other cities I've worked in is the new structure can't be taller than the existing structure. So I don't know if that's already in there or not, but you can't just say, well, I have this boundary line, but I'm going up, in this, as high as I
Like
can.
a tower.
Right, so the second unit can't be taller than the original unit. And then the other thing that comes to mind is, there are already ordinances around, water sources, and if you're within 100 feet of a lake or river, you can't build, but you get sort of that one-time 30% improvement to your home. Maybe there's some way of incorporating something like that into this law where it's not an infinite number of improvements. It's like you can do this, do it right one time, and then that's it. That's what your property gets.
Oh, yeah, that's a good idea,
That
too.
is the way it's
It is
set
the
up
way,
in
yeah.
our
Yeah.
draft,
Cassie?
Sorry, that was from before.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Any other comments on LD 2003?
I had one question. And
Yeah.
do you remember what code had recommended for a maximum? Was it 725 or 750 or?
The code enforcement, Dan Bradstreet said that if you restrict it to under 750 square feet, then there would not be mobile homes used
Right.
as ADUs because mobile homes have to be 750 square feet or more.
And I think we all kind of agreed on that. So if we went on a percentage base, we would want to still cap it at a
At
certain.
750,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so that if someone has a 5,000 square foot house, they
Yeah,
can't,
yeah,
throw in
exactly.
a shipping container
Right.
whenever he wants.
I still like the shipping containers.
Any other questions or comments on 2003? So we will be voting on that ordinance to send it to city council in our next meeting.
Which will be when? So we have a quorum for October 24th, but it was largely to accommodate, Jeff is gone. We don't know if the Nails wanted to come
Oh.
back on the 24th. Yeah, maybe they'll be ready on the 24th.
Okay. Well, or we can vote on this ordinance on the 24th, so.
Right, I just didn't want this to be the only item on the agenda on the 24th if possible.
Yeah.
But if it is, it's not a bad thing. I mean.
Are you
It'll be
planning a
short
party for
meeting,
us?
yeah.
It'll be a short meeting, but it
No,
does
but
have
I
to go
mean,
back to
if
the
we
council,
put it
and then
off,
they have to make 2 votes,
What if we
and
don't
do
get
have
a
the
quorum the
deadline.
following
And
meeting? Yeah, I know you just.
Okay. Now, moving on to another revision to the zoning ordinance.
Not to
Yeah.
be too much of a nuisance, but if we postpone this to a date, oh no, we didn't advertise this time,
Yeah.
never mind. I was just trying to save the city a legal notice, because they're very expensive, but
Okay.
never mind. We have to advertise it anyway.
All right. So now, moving on to another zoning revision, the solar farm ordinance. The city council sent us back the solar farm ordinance. And do you want to kind of summarize a little bit?
Okay. So, one moment. So the council passed a resolution asking the planning board to discuss solar farms, and specifically, they wanted us to discuss the location of solar farms in regard to a list of items here. I'm looking for my notes. Sorry.
Thank you, guys.
Okay. So we're concerned about the visual impacts of solar farms, habitat impacts, neighborhood impacts, stormwater, recreation, and the limited land area in Waterville. Waterville has a fairly small footprint, and so I guess I think it was especially Rebecca Green who was interested in this, looking at. So our new city manager is here, and he knows more about this than I do, if he wanted to say something to us.
No, I think you uncovered it. Really, the council and a number of councilors had specific concerns as solar farms become more commonplace and seems to be proliferating in the area. And this is not a statement in any way in opposition to solar. It's just obviously, as we have more and more solar projects coming forward, where are they placed? How are they placed? Neighborhood impacts, visual impacts, habitat. You know, I don't think here, but you're seeing proposals out there that involve clear cutting hundreds of acres, in some cases, of trees. So I think they're looking for some more guidance in that regard. And also, you know, recreational opportunities. I know the trail system was impacted behind the hospital with some solar development up there. So I think all these things together, they just decided to send it back to you for another review and another look as these things become more common. And we want to be more, I think, just judicious and smart about their placement.
Great. So I read way too many solar ordinances in the last 24 hours than I care to admit. And a couple interesting things that I noticed that I think could help address some of the council's concerns that maybe we might want to look at is specifically adding some language in the right now you have to obviously rezone a property for a solar farm, so we look at it by a case basis. So maybe adding some language that we should prioritize solar on previously developed like land or you know, downgraded land like the old landfill, things like that. You know, land that might not be suitable for housing anymore or something like that. So just adding that specification. And then Topsum did something neat, which I liked, and that was adding a fee if the development impacted any habitats at all. So thinking of like the, you know, grassy field, they added a 15% of the value of the land, and that money went into a conservation fund to help, you know, mitigate the trail systems or rework the trail systems or what have you, as one of the things. I think they had hoped that it would dissuade people from building in those areas, but it didn't, but they are generating a revenue source to help with other conservation efforts. As far as the land situation and how many solar projects we have based off of our land mass, I thought maybe it might make sense to come up with a percentage of, you know, the total land mass of Waterville that could be used for solar, and maybe we cap out at a certain point and we don't accept new projects after that point. And then another interesting thing that I saw in other ordinances, which I liked, was they created a difference between an accessory solar project and a principal use solar project. So an accessory solar project being like Bill Mitchell's, where it's a project that he would own and it's generating power for his businesses. He's using that power versus like a principal, like the solar farms that we think of, like a company coming in and they're selling the power to CMP. You know, another accessory one that we've approved recently is the Central Maine Motors one, where they asked for an accessory type solar project. So that we might be able to differentiate between some of those things where we're still allowing businesses and organizations to invest in solar for their purposes and to meet their own climate goals or what have you, and maybe prioritizing that over some of these large scale, really industrial type projects. And then another thing that I saw in my little rabbit hole was that quite a few municipalities differentiate between the size of the solar project and how they deal with those. Some of them set a megawatt or a kilowatt cap to determine the size. Some, it's a land size. And so they use that as a way to determine where those types of projects can be allowed, and control kind of the land use in that way as well. So those were some of the things that I found today. Yeah, Bruce.
You mentioned about like, how many in a square, percentage. Do we know like where we're at now? How many do we have, and how much is it taken up in land and things like that?
Yeah, so, yeah, I did make a table.
Yeah.
But the amount of land used for the solar panels isn't the same as the amount of land that the property owner has in this project. So it's not a good, I don't know if you want to cap the area that's covered by solar panels versus the area of the parcel. One of them, Next Grid, is 18 acres. That's at 101 Webb Road. Let's see, that's the one, hang on a minute. That's the one on the west side of the interstate. So just the area with the panels, I believe, is 18 acres. And then what we've called the Broadhead project that's on land leased at the airport. And they're leasing 28 acres. So I don't think the solar field is much different from that. But I couldn't be sure.
It says 23,000.
Yeah, it says
of
20,000,
impervious.
23. This is from old planning board minutes.
Oh, okay.
So, and their application. So that particular one, it says 23,000 square feet of impervious area, which includes the access road. But again, the panels, they're pretty much upright, so I can't really tell you exactly what that means. The base of the base that the panels stand on would be part of the impervious area, but probably the panels themselves aren't impervious because the water can run under them. So it would be kind of hard to come up with these numbers. I'd like to see your ordinances to know exactly how they calculate the amount of land that's used.
I can make a comment. While we're talking about impervious area and requirements, one of the requirements, I believe it was in the top, or it's the Auburn example, is that they have an installation method requirement, which restricts acceptable installation methods to pile-driven or ballast rock footing to minimize disturbance of the soils during installation. And furthermore, in the Auburn example, if the panels were to be removed, the mitigation would include 12 inches of topsoil, and if it's agricultural land, it would be 48 inches of topsoil, so as not to contaminate or impede any future use of that land for agriculture or development.
But where is that soil coming from if you're just taking it from another site then?
I don't, maybe it was just, it had to be cleaned or tested. I don't know precisely if they're replacing the soil, but it would require, if they're putting cement footings or something more substantial than rock ballasts or steel piles, I imagine they would have to remove them to a depth of 48 inches under the surface. So we can research that further, but it came from Auburn, which has a pretty extensive agricultural community, and they had mitigation in place for solar panels.
So like Reed Fields says, shall not exceed 20% coverage of the lot area. So they set it by different lot sizes. And it says lot coverage shall be calculated based off of the total airspace projected over the ground. So.
What, could you say that again?
So it says, lot coverage would be calculated based off the total airspace projected over the ground, right? So you take the how much airspace it
So
uses.
they are including
Yeah.
the panel, the land of the.
Yeah,
Okay.
the panel land.
That's good.
Well, that was because each parcel can only have 20% coverage. You know, so if you have a 20-acre parcel, only 20% of that can be covered with solar panels. I'm suggesting we look at like a city-wide. Like if we, you know, we have 16 square miles. What percentage of that do we want to cap out at solar?
I like that idea of capping based on the square mile.
One of the comments that came up during Rick Breton's proposal, and this is from the solar consultant that he hired, and they said there were currently not many new solar projects that were able to be installed in the city of Waterville because of CMP connectivity standards, distances from substations, three-phase services, and I believe the one that is proposed by, or is being researched by Thomas College, their request proposal, would be the last one in that area based on the CMP limitations. And that came up during our conversation with the solar developer. So there's a finite limit based on the current grid.
That was my thinking too, and then the code enforcement officer said, well, you know, they could add another substation, so it becomes more and more complicated, but.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's
have
always
no
possible,
idea-
right?
Yeah, I have no idea what the likelihood is of their adding another, and I don't know where they would add it, so, I mean, I guess we'd have to look at where all the transmission lines are, and so.
So I'm.
You're right, at this point, they're gonna max out the substations.
So I'm looking at what was sent to us from the city council, and I'm trying to just think through in my head what prompted it. And so the first point is the negative visual impacts of large-scale solar facilities, right? And I'm sort of reflecting on, I mean, negative visual impacts. I mean, that's sort of in the eye of the beholder, right? What someone sees as ugly, someone else can see as beautiful because it's helpful to the environment, right? So it's important when we have this discussion to think about what the purpose is and why, if we're going to put restrictions on this, why we're doing that. If we're going to do that because we just think it's ugly, I don't think that's legitimate reason. If we have other reasons for it, then we need to back those up with a foundation that makes sense. And so I think there are some other things that could point to it. I'm just not sure that we have enough information there. Wildlife habitat impacts. Yes and no. We know that there are some projects that don't have fences, and we know for a fact that wildlife do, in fact, habitate these areas. If we have a fence around it, then they often don't. Like if you see the Augusta area when it's near the interstate and they have fences around it, it's harder for wildlife to get to it. So if we want to make these statements, we really need to back them up with some actual facts that have been researched. And I'm not sure if, I mean, maybe we need to get someone in here who can really give us more information. Runoff and erosion, yes and no. I think the people who build these certainly construct them in ways that they're trying to limit that. I absolutely love, however, what Tom had suggested, though, with the installation and the mitigation. I think those are really fabulous ideas that we could do. I think there's something to be said about if Waterville wants to sell land, then, you know, we need to recognize when we sell land that unless we have a covenant that prevents somebody from doing something, unless we zone it in a certain way that prevents somebody from doing something, then we allow that. And that's no different than when somebody buys a piece of property in town and wants to cut down all their trees, and neighbors get angry about that. So that's sort of this question that we're having right now. And again, that could be unfortunate, but that is part of it. If we're talking about using that land for recreational possibilities, which is sort of what's hinted at here, then Waterville should be developing those lands for recreational possibilities. Otherwise, you know, I love the idea of if we're going to use that land and lease it to make money, then maybe Waterville should be doing something like that. And we could absolutely word ordinances like that. If somebody wants to have a solar farm, maybe we should lease land and we should be making money off of it. I don't know that that's really what is stated here. I mean, again, it's an interesting conversation. I'm just not sure that we have enough facts to sort of back up anything other than we know what other towns do, but why? Because they don't like the looks of it? I don't know if that's a good enough reason for me. But I do like, again, there are really great reasons when somebody puts a solar farm in to say you have to have these installation practices, and when you're done with it, we have to make sure that it's mitigated properly. That makes sense too. Or we only have so many trees in Waterville and we want to protect them. Maybe that's legitimate too. But then what else are we doing with that land, right?
I do think that one of the concerns that Councilor Green had, specifically, I know just because she's told me, maybe it's not in the resolution, is, if we're using some of this land that could be used for housing, right? And so I do think that, and I think that that's a very valid concern when we look at the area that we have to develop in Waterville and how limited we are in that, and being able to diversify our tax base and be able to build new housing is important. And so I can understand where that would be a concern, which is why I mentioned possibly bringing in some sort of language that's like, let's prioritize it in these types of areas. I think putting solar panels on top of an old dump makes great sense, right? Like, you can't build housing on top of an old landfill. So, and I thought that the fee for habitat mitigation was interesting too, because it might allow the city to redevelop other areas for recreation and things like that as well, and just hopefully dissuade people from using just the open farmland that the deers are grazing in, right? But yeah, I also agree, Hillary. I think that we could benefit from having maybe some experts come in that maybe can tell us about solar developments a little more in a little more detail, and give us some good insight to what might make sense. Maybe what our ordinance is missing or doesn't, or is doing wrong, or any of that. I have seen like we require a fence. And I've seen in another ordinance, and I can't remember what town, where the fence has to be like 6 inches off the ground or whatever, so that small animals can still pass through.
Right.
But it still provides that same, protection. And I mean, I understand wanting vegetative buffers. I also have seen more specific information on like vegetative management, which I don't think our ordinance has, but would be important to maybe add in there. I know it's not one of the things they called out, but just looking at our ordinance, it is something that's missing, making sure that it's not using pesticides. Like, we're not going to ruin the land for future use.
Yeah.
I think is important. But I also agree, Hillary, some of this is other people's land,
and that's such a tough discussion to have, right?
I mean, part of the problem, right, is if someone can make more money by putting solar panels on their old farmland that they're not using for farming anymore, than they can building housing on it. Like, that's a different conversation, and we need to talk about why that barrier exists. But
or if someone can't afford to build housing on it, but they can afford to do this,
right? Yeah,
and
so
that's probably the bigger reality.
Where's the barrier there, right? Yeah. Like, why is it more cost effective? So, yeah, I mean, it would be, I don't know, are any of the counselors online?
Let me look.
No, okay. Bruce?
That's a good point, though, about if we bring somebody in, we ought to do it as with the council and other groups, maybe the housing committee and things like that, so that we're all hearing that. And we do need to remember that. I think, like you said, the housing seems to be bringing a lot of this on. But having a discussion now is much better than when maybe the next project comes and we're kind of like wondering if we really should do it or not. And when these go in, they're in for 30 years. So it is a pretty big deal. You know, we need to really give this some due diligence, and we have, I think, but I think it's a great discussion to start and see
I don't
where it
know
goes.
if there's like, maybe you know, Bruce, somebody at the state that, there must be in the governor's energy office that might handle this? Like handle different solar? Yeah, that could maybe present on like, this is what, things that we're seeing around the state, and looking at your ordinance, here are some suggestions we could make, or, I do think it's important, obviously, to find a way to prioritize housing. I just don't know if it's always going to be financially feasible. It's very expensive to build housing right now. But
We're probably not, like you say, we're not the only community
Oh.
having this discussion.
no, absolutely not.
And some
And I
are
think
just
that our
putting
solar
moratoriums
ordinance,
and-
was sort of written, you know, to get the conversation started and some of these developments started, and maybe it is time to look at it and see what needs to be added or, changed. But, yeah, I also am a little confused as to what specifically they're looking for, other than those things like prioritizing wildlife, and that's where I came up with the,
Right.
you know, if you're disturbing wildlife habitat, maybe we have you pay a fee for
Right.
doing so.
Right,
or-
and I want to be clear, and so I have solar panels on my house, right? And what we're talking about is not residential solar. We're talking about big solar projects, and again, like I think they're generally a good thing for the environment. But what we're, you know, it's a good question to ask. But is it motivated by, we think they're ugly, or we're trying to get people to develop housing?
Yeah.
And that's not why you rewrite an ordinance. You know, but things can be ugly. And I mean, one of the things that I think about that makes Maine really cool is that you can drive down the interstate and not see billboards, right? Like, that's really great. But certainly you can make a legitimate argument for why solar cells serve a greater purpose than maybe billboards. But of course, I'm not an advertisement, so, you know, don't quote me on that if you've got a business and you'd like a billboard. So, yeah. I mean, I think I don't know. I think it would be good to have someone come in and talk to us about the concerns that cities have and why this might be wise to limit or rewrite or reword.
I think it would also be helpful if maybe a counselor or two or the mayor could come and have this discussion with us as well, since they're the ones that are asking us to look at it. A little more guidance as to what specifically they want.
Because I know when Thomas was in here, I mean, Thomas is a private entity.
Yep.
I love the fact that we know they'd like to reduce their carbon footprint. I applaud them for wanting to do that. That's no different than, wasn't it Bill that was in here that wanted to do the same kind of thing, and he wanted to limit. I mean, I applaud anyone who's trying to do that. There's a legitimate question for, do we have limited land, and do we want to use that land differently for the city of Waterville? If that's the answer, yes, and how do we do that? And maybe that's what everybody's getting. But expert opinions, I think, would be great to get in here.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it was interesting to see other ordinances, quite a few of them differentiate between the size, right? Because there's there's a big difference between a residential size, you know, like 1 or 2 panels, even if you can't put them on your roof and you have them in your backyard instead.
Yeah.
That's a really big difference than, you know, what's along the interstate.
Exactly.
And I don't think that they should be treated the same.
No.
I think this is really targeted at large-scale solar farms, not talking about residential.
No,
Yeah.
it is. It's clear that it's, and that's why I said, like, it's very clear. I think I'm sort of saying that, so I feel the need to disclose. Like, I have 30 panels on my house. I've got a whole, but it's not. No, but I want to be clear. I support solar panels, but it's not that I'm like, I want every tree to be cut down and have solar cells
Right.
everywhere in town. But again, I think if we can get some experts in and sort of talk about some of the concerns, I think that makes sense. And I think, I mean, if I understand looking at this, what the city council is asking is they're just asking for more guidance. So, I mean, we can get them in here, but I think they're going to be asking that same question. We need more guidance, I think. I mean, unless did you hear anything different?
No, I
Yeah.
think you guys have captured kind of the essence of it.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think there's anything, I think they're waiting for another body to kind of take a look at it and give a report back on your thoughts and what may be missing. And I think looking at other ordinances and seeing what else is out there, what may be a good fit here is always my exercise.
Yeah, I mean, the kind of irony of the whole thing though is like, we have to send them a solar project and they have to rezone it with 2 votes. So like, they have all of the guidance that they want to say yes or no. So it's like confusing as to what they want us specifically to help them create. Because if they don't like the project, they don't have to rezone it, right? So,
Okay, so let's think about this for a minute, because obviously, I mean, you can bring someone in who has a business, but their business is making solar cells. So I mean, they're going to say no, it doesn't hurt wildlife, right?
well, that's why
right.
I suggested someone from like the governor's energy office or something
that would be great.
that might have more of a broad view
And
on,
across Maine. I think that
across
would be,
the state,
that would be
and
great.
like what sorts of things have they seen work really well in communities, and what sorts of things could use some improvement in communities. And I mean, I'm sure I have a friend in the energy office that I could reach out to, but
Okay.
I think that there's probably somebody that oversees a lot of this type of work, right?
And I think
Across the
if we can give them more, I think if we can define it a little better, then it doesn't mean that they're saying yay or nay on projects that feel like it's willy-nilly, right? So that I say city council can have, like, it's not like, yes, we like this, and no, we don't, that they can, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
There are a few little tweaks that we could make that might have some impact on the visual aspect of this. And our ordinance right now says that if your solar farm is across the street from a residential district, you have to add landscaping along the street. And so we could change the ordinance to say that if your project is wherever, it has to have landscaping along the street. But then we have to be careful with projects like the sanitary treatment district's solar farm is, I don't know how far, 300 feet away from the street. So, and also the one that Chris Gauntz is proposing for Central Maine Motors abuts Aviation Way, which is a private road, and it just leads to some storage units. So I think we'd want to make sure that we were talking about city streets as opposed to private ways.
Well, and the landscaping can be tricky because of the shadows, depending on where the landscaping is in relationship to the solar cells.
Yeah.
Any kind of shadows that it casts impedes the amount of energy that it can get.
Yeah,
So if you're talking
exactly.
about solar panels being really close to a road and there's nothing near the road, anything that you insist being there is
And if there's a slope, if their panels are on a slope, then you're only going to be screening the panels right along the road. So.
Right.
But anyway, they ask for visual impact suggestions. So.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, other than buffers, I think one of the concerns was the project that was kind of along the airport there, where trees weren't supposed to be cut down, and then trees were cut down or something like that. I remember Councilor Foss being mad about that, right?
I believe so. I believe also in the Auburn example, the Auburn ordinance, they have someone that goes in and inspects the construction of the site. I believe it's every week or every 30 days, so as they don't cut down excessive amounts of trees or do something that they're not supposed to do. That's a code enforcement issue.
The following,
Yeah.
Yeah, they kind of like chopped off the trees at 6 feet. It was really bad for a while. And so I think that was a major concern a little while ago because they weren't really following what was required of them. But like once somebody chops down a 20-foot tree, the tree is down, right? And it wouldn't have been it wasn't like close to, it was the trees like close to the road, not close to the panels. So, yeah, like I think that was one of the visual buffer concerns way back when. But I'm trying to think of like driving by the other solar projects, and I don't necessarily see them other than when I'm on the highway.
So, Sam,
Road
is this something we're gonna do like we did with the housing ordinance or LD
Yeah, we can't vote on
203?
anything tonight.
No, I know, but are we gonna like put this on the agenda again and maybe have some more discussion at the next meeting if it, just kind of keep it as an ongoing,
Yeah,
so we have it in front of us?
yeah, I think that, and Counselor Green,
That sounds good.
texted me, and she's actually listening, she just didn't register to talk. So I'll connect with her again too. But I think what she said is, looking at some of the other ordinances and maybe talking to an expert and just seeing maybe what we're missing, what other communities are doing that work really well. Yeah, I found
you had the friend, you said, so if you need anything from me, let me know, but
Yeah.
I'll let you pursue the contact you have.
Yeah, I'll reach out to them and see what he says, and
I think it'd be great.
if he knows somebody. If not, I'll follow up with you, Bruce, and see if you can put some pressure on somebody.
Sounds good.
But yeah, I think it is worth a discussion. It's just, yeah, we don't want to be reactionary to something, but being proactive is beneficial, I think, and I do think it is a valid argument that we have a land mass wise, we have a very small city, right? And there's a lot of concerns about property taxes, and we haven't had a lot of new housing stock and all of these things. And if we're covering a huge field that could be a subdivision with solar panels for 30 years, then no housing is going to ever be built there for 30 years, right? So I think it is wise to kind of look at what are our other impacts. But yeah, any other comments?
Thank you, too, for doing all that research. That's wonderful.
You're welcome. I found a neat study that was done by the Farmland Trust, which I thought was pretty interesting, and that's where I found like those ordinances and then dug a little deeper into them. So I'll send that out to the group as well. I found that today. But it was neat. They did a full like assessment of this is the ordinances and this has been the impact of these types of things. So like, does limiting the size of the project have any impact really on where the developments happen? And I thought it was
Well, I'm
pretty good.
happy that Tom brought that up about what was mentioned in the previous discussion, that if CMP or if that thing's maxed out, that gives us a little breathing room.
Also, back in 2021, there was a great deal of urgency to get these projects done and approved because there was a state a program that rewarded developers, and I believe that program is sunset, or it's not as incentivized as it was back in 2021. So, yeah,
It is like the 3 solar projects that we've had come before us recently have all been kind of that accessory use, right? Like a company wanting to put in solar for their use to help offset their energy outputs, which with the rising cost of energy, I can completely appreciate. And like Thomas wanting to meet certain climate goals that they've set forth, I could completely appreciate. So maybe it is worth having something in the ordinance that gives people a little more guidance before they come to the board of like, these are the type of projects we're looking for, you know?
Yeah.
And if you're not meeting this kind of requirement, then we probably won't approve you to be rezoned, right?
Yeah.
So that might be it might be helpful to businesses as well that are looking to add solar as part of their energy consumption, and figuring that out. Then it's less like I'm coming to the board for a rezone and I have no idea how they're going to react, and more of like this is what I plan to do and how I'm going to follow the ordinance. So, all right. Any other comments? Okay. Is that the last thing? I think so.
That's it.
Okay. I'll motion to adjourn.
Second.